I'm joined today on Think Again TV by Sheila Ayala.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here.
Sheila, you are one of the co-founders of a unique organization called Secular Ontario, and now you've been serving as president for 3 years. So I think you're a really good person to talk to a little bit about one of the key initiatives related to secularism in Ontario. But first, tell me a little bit about this organization, Secular Ontario.
Yes, well, Secular Ontario was created in 2006 to combat religious references in the public domain. It is operated by a board of 6 directors. Anybody can join for a nominal fee. The association is not a charity, so that it can be politically active, and it is registered with the federal government.
We're going to focus today on one of Secular Ontario's key initiatives, which has to do specifically with prayers in the public domain. But when Secular Ontario was first founded in 2006, was it done with the goal of dealing with the prayer issue, or was its mandate broader and then you decided to take on prayers because that ended up being, something that was making news at the time?
Yeah, well, the mandate of Secular Ontario is, as I said, to ensure that the public domain is secular, but as it so happened, our first foray into that was with prayers at local councils.
Sheila, I'd like to explore with you the history of efforts to modernize municipal government proceedings by removing the use of the Lord's Prayer or other kinds of prayers. Can you tell me how all that got started?
Yeah, well, Secular Ontario has limited resources, so it has to pick its battles. And one of them was the municipalities saying the Lord's Prayer. Secular Ontario has limited resources, so it has to be very careful in picking its battles. In 1999, Henry Freitag took...
the city of Penetanguishene, was it that one?
Yes, it was that one, yeah. He took the town to court to protest the saying of the Lord's Prayer. The court ruled that this prayer was specific to Christianity and was offensive to Freitag, who is Jewish. The court ruling applied to all municipalities across Ontario.
This was the Ontario Court of Appeal.
That's right, yes. Any council meetings saying the Lord's Prayer is acting illegally. And so Secular Ontario knew it could go after other municipalities and win the case, or win the cases.
I think it's important to clarify that this case, at least in its initial ruling, was specific just to the Lord's Prayer.
That's right.
It wasn't necessarily ruling against prayer in a more general capacity.
In a generic kind of prayer, no.
Okay, so Penetanguishene, 1999. What happens next?
A member of the Humanist Association of Canada, Bob Allen, was a resident of Eganville, which is north of Ottawa. Eganville, yeah. In the year 2000, Bob Allen attended a council meeting and was horrified that at that meeting they opened the session with the Lord's Prayer. At the next council meeting, Bob took a recording or a tape of John Lennon's Imagine and played it while the council was saying the Lord's Prayer. And so in the end, he was ceremoniously evicted from the council meeting by the Sergeant of Arms. So Bob turned around and sued the council. He won because of the 1999 decision.
Because again, it was a Lord's Prayer.
It was the Lord's Prayer.
In both of these cities.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Go on.
But his victory was short-lived because the town, Eganville, then turned around and said a generic prayer. So Bob took them to court again, but this time he lost. So the judge argued that a non-Pacific prayer was acceptable because it wasn't different from other religions, because that is ignoring Buddhism, humanism, Hindu, and many others. Bob Allen has since moved away.
He's beyond Ontario now.
He actually lives in BC. So, of course, it's out of his jurisdiction.
By the way, which level of court was it that made that ruling on his case?
It was the first level.
Okay, not the appeal court.
No, not the appeal. Well, this is the point. He was going to appeal, but then he moved away, so of course the case was then dropped. Secular Ontario recognised that it shouldn't really be up to an individual to have to spend the time and the money and the resources. It should be an organisation that takes up these cases on behalf of the people who have a problem with the Lord's Prayer at council meetings. When Bob moved away, a few of us recognised that making sure religion was kept in the public domain should not be left up to one individual, and decided what was needed was an organisation whose sole purpose is to keep society secular. The way Canada is governed has resulted in having a lot of laws fall under provincial jurisdiction and not federal. This means that it will be up to humanists, atheists in each province to challenge these laws. I haven't taken up the prayer cases. Secular Ontario identified 28 offending municipalities.
Just within this province?
Just within this province. And Secular Ontario sent them what they called a cease and desist letter.
I see.
And 4 of them complied with our wishes.
4 out of 28?
Yeah.
What kind of response did you get from the other 24 offending municipalities?
Some of them, nothing, okay. Some of them said that they were just going to continue the Lord's Prayer.
Really?
Yeah.
They acknowledged the letter and just rebuked you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many, do you recall how many sent you that kind of response?
Oh, maybe about half. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So those municipalities that either continue to say the Lord's Prayer or have told us that they are going to continue saying the Lord's Prayer, we could take them to court, but our problem with Secular Ontario is you have to have a plaintiff in the jurisdiction, and then we represent the plaintiff. Mm-hmm. And that's been one of our problems, because either we haven't been able to find somebody, or we've found somebody but then they back out in the last moment. But we were fortunate in getting plaintiffs for Bancroft and Owen Sound and Pembroke.
And Pembroke?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tell me which of those came first?
It was the Bancroft one first, and we were successful with that. And in fact, they don't say anything.
Well, tell me a little bit more detail now about Bancroft. When did that case happen, and what were they saying in Bancroft?
Okay.
And how did that one play out?
Yeah, it was I guess you'd say satisfactorily resolved last year, okay, 2012. And what they were saying was the Lord's Prayer. Last year, in 2012, we took on the Council of Bancroft. Now, our plaintiff there was Dagmar Gontard. She approached the mayor and the various councillors and explained her view and why she felt offended by them saying the Lord's Prayer, but they more or less ignored her. It wasn't until we threatened to take them to court did they back down, because their own lawyer would have known that they couldn't win. And so now, apparently, they just say, I think they just have a moment of silence.
So the mere threat of being taken to court was enough for victory in that particular case? In that case,
yeah, it is, because any lawyer from the council will look at the 1999 case and would say, listen, you're not going to win this. It's a waste of money. Mm-hmm.
So that was settled in 2012. When did that case begin? Or when did the lawyers get involved in
Yeah,
that case?
probably 2011
Okay.
into 2012. Yeah.
So that was Dagmar who
Yeah.
was championing that one.
Yeah.
Go on.
Now, Dagmar, I think she started with her complaint in 2010, I think, and then it
Yeah.
took a few years to go through the motions. So right now we have two cases pending. One is from Veronica Abbas from now she's in Peterborough, and the other one is Peter Ferguson, and he lives in the Owen Sound area.
Right.
So these two are still ongoing, and we're going to have to wait to see how that plays out.
Tell me a little bit about the situation in Peterborough. Let's start with that one
Okay.
first. Yeah.
Well, Peterborough, they have refused to stop saying the Lord's Prayer. So we're just waiting to get a court time to take them to court.
Despite the fact that they know it's illegal
Yes.
based on the Penetanguishene decision, they're
Yeah.
still refusing to change.
But I think once they realise that we are challenging them in court, they will back down.
And the case with Peter Ferguson out in Owen Sound?
The Peter Ferguson one, we're still waiting for some more information on that. But it's one of those things that is pending, and with the law, it can take
some
time.
time, yeah. The first step you did with Secular Ontario was to send these letters to 28 municipalities to remind them of what the law of the land was.
Yes.
Why do you think in so few cases they actually followed the simple request to remove prayer? Doesn't seem like it's that odious, is it?
Well, it's not from my point of view, but a lot of municipalities, they rely on tradition, and they tell us, well, it's always been that way. That's what they've always done. But the other thing is that they don't think it's offensive. They don't understand why it's offensive to non-Christians. And the other reason we hear time and time again is that Canada was founded on Christian principles. They also attack us by saying secular Ontario is interfering with religious freedom, which, of course, we're not, because we're not stopping them from believing whatever they want. We don't stop them from going to their synagogues and churches and temples and mosques and so on. We just say, please, at council meetings, it should be secular, so please stop referring to any religion or religious artifacts or prayers.
So Sheila, what is so offensive about the Lord's Prayer then?
When councils open with the Lord's Prayer, or any prayer for that matter, they're excluding non-Christians. Governing bodies, such as municipalities, have the mandate to accommodate all residents.
I think a lot of people are going to say that while you're correct about the letter of the law being violated, it's not that big a deal, and why do you put so much time and effort into these particular cases? Well, how would you respond to that?
Well, Secular Ontario strongly believes that all governing bodies should be secular. Belief in religion or a non-belief in religion is a private matter. But having the public domain secular plays no favourite with a particular religion or sect, and it includes everyone.
In some cities where the Lord's Prayer has been replaced by a moment of silence, or sometimes by a more generic prayer, or in some cases actually by a combination of the two, or in cases where the tradition has always been the more supposedly inclusive prayer approach, a lot of politicians even have come out defending that solution as being fair and inclusive. But you still would have a problem with that. Why?
Well, yes, because that option presumes that everyone is religious, but not everyone is. Non-believers are the fastest growing sector and is increasing all the time, so they should be accommodated.
Sheila, in a number of other jurisdictions, I'm thinking of a few cases in Quebec and in Saskatoon, where prayers have also been used in government municipal proceedings. In a few of those cases, the affected parties have opted to take their cities to the human rights commissions. Why did you not go that route, or did you consider going that route?
Well, we did consider, but we felt that court decisions would carry more weight in getting municipalities to comply with our request.
Secular Ontario is heavily involved in and tracking a number of current cases. What next steps will the organization be taking?
Well, Secular Ontario will continue to chase after those municipalities that are still saying the Lord's Prayer. Once we've won all those cases across the province, and I know it's going to take time, and it's a big deal, we will then go after those councils that are saying the generic prayer.
So your priority is the more, clearly Christian.
Yes, yes.
And after all of that is done, what other projects outside of the issue of municipal prayers will Secular Ontario be transitioning into?
Well, it will, as Secular Ontario evolves, it will fight in other areas such as a separate school system, which we do support the one school system network. Things like the Sharia law, mergers with Catholic hospitals, and so on.
Actually, could you describe a little bit more what you mean about the Catholic hospitals? What's the issue there?
Well, the issue is, well, it always comes down to finance, right? And so in some jurisdictions, they've had to close one hospital when there were two hospitals. And sometimes they close the public one and then merge all the facilities and administration, whatever, into the Catholic one. And the problem with that is Catholics have certain rules about certain health issues. And so, our argument is, well, if you have to close a hospital, it's better to close the Catholic one and not the public one.
Sheila, in our last few minutes, I just want to switch gears. I want to bring into this conversation a recent development out of Quebec that's a little bit disappointing, I think. The mayor of Saguenay, Quebec, had been using a religious prayer to open his proceedings, and the case had made its way all the way up to the Quebec Court of Appeal. And I want to read to you from the ruling, where the Court of Appeal basically ruled in favor of the city, in favor of the mayor. And what they said was that neutrality does not require, quote, that society be cleansed of all denominational reality, including that which falls within its cultural history. There was no evidence that the prayer, recited before the official opening of council meetings, was imposing religious views on citizens or shaping government actions. On top of this 20-second religious prayer, the Quebec Appeal Court also okayed some religious symbols, including an artist's rendition of a crucifix and a 60-centimeter high statue of the Sacred Heart. Both of those items had been displayed there in the council chambers. How do you respond to this latest development?
Well, Secular Ontario would argue that any religious reference is imposing their views on its citizens, given some of the disastrous decisions made by the City of Ottawa, and I can only speak about Ottawa because it's my municipality. We suggest that they either get another god, or even better yet, leave religion altogether. A few years ago, the City of Ottawa mapped out a route for a light rail system and awarded the contract to Siemens. And then shortly after, they turned around and cancelled the contract. Siemens sued and won for $34 million. That's right, $34 million. You can't tell us that that is good governance. And what good did all this praying do? That's true. Can you imagine that? $34 million.
That's great. Well, I want to read to you another quote. This one is from the mayor of Saguenay. And he said, I fight this battle because I adore Christ. When I get to the other side, presumably he means he's going to
After death, yeah.
I'm going to be able to be a little proud. I'm going to be able to tell him, I fought for you. There is no more beautiful argument. Now, this was him defending his decision to fight on behalf of the city as he saw it to continue with this tradition. I'm wondering, Sheila, what can we conclude about the neutrality of the mayor of Saguenay from this seemingly quite blatant connection between his duties as mayor and his religiosity?
You know, I just can't believe the mayor said that. I think what the mayor said was repulsive. The mayor was elected to oversee the budget, maintain a police force, social services, sewer systems, roads, snow plowing, etc. No one elected him to fight this battle. If he wants to influence people to his religion, then I think he should resign and become a priest.
Many of these issues are, to an extent, interconnected, and in ruling on this decision, the judge actually defended the prayer, the public city prayer, by pointing to the ubiquity of Christian symbols, and he actually mentioned Canada's national anthem, which includes a reference to God. How do you fight one battle when you have all of these, pretty disconnected issues related to church-state separation, like the anthem, that then get sort of harnessed in these kinds of situations to defend this status quo?
Yeah, well, it is in keeping with our mandate to keep all things public or public domain secular. And as for the national anthem, we believe it should be gender neutral and religious free. But how to persuade, well, I guess it would be the government, I guess, to change the words. It won't be an easy task, but I think if there was enough popular support for it, then changes could be made.
How will this decision in Quebec impact what you guys are doing in Ontario, or will it have any effect at all?
Yeah, any court decisions in Quebec has no legal standing in any other province. However, if a case in Quebec or a judgment by a court in Quebec was favourable to our point of view, then we could use it in Ontario, or other provinces could also use it, to strengthen their own cases.
So presumably your political opponents, or your legal opponents in this case, could point to Quebec and use it against
That's also true. That's also true. And that's why we're hoping that the plaintiffs in Quebec will take it to the Supreme Court, because this is something that really has to be settled.
Do you know if the Supreme Court is more likely to consider the case, given that there now appears to be a bit of an inconsistency between the two provinces? Ontario at least has ruled that the Lord's Prayer is illegal, unconstitutional, while Quebec seems to be taking a more open approach to allowing prayers.
Yeah. I think the Supreme Court will be more liberal in their findings and ruling, simply because there is too many discrepancies among the.
So there's a good chance they would consider hearing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can't really speak to that, but I think there would be.
Do we have any idea when the Quebec appeal decision will be further appealed to the Supreme Court?
Well, no, we don't, because first of all, it's up to the plaintiffs if they want to proceed. And then the Supreme Court has a list of cases that, the people want them to hear. So it's probably got to go through all that. So you may be looking 2-3 years down the road.
Before we have a final decision.
Before we have a final decision, yeah.
And in the meantime, you'll keep up this fight?
Of course we will.
Thank you so much, Sheila Ayala, for joining us here on Think Again TV.
It's been my pleasure.
Dagmar, thank you so much for joining me here on Think Again TV.
And it's nice to have you.
You're actually, I think, kind of unique in that you've had a lot of success in your fight to secularize and modernize government proceedings in your municipality. We'll get into the methods you used and why you were successful, but first, a little bit complicated here. There's a lot of municipalities, there's a county involved.
Yeah.
Can you take us through the different jurisdictions and how they relate to each other and what happened in each place?
Well, my place is between place where I live is between Bancroft and Maynooth, and actually these two are two distinct municipalities. One is Bancroft and one is Maynooth, and that one in Maynooth, the official title is Hastings Highlands. So I am officially part of the municipality of Hastings Highlands. Now those two municipalities, Bancroft and Hastings Highlands, are part with other municipalities. I think they are 17, but they are part of what is county, and that county is Hastings County. And that Hastings County is based in Belleville, and Belleville, the city of Belleville, which is much more important than Bancroft, is about 115 kilometers from Bancroft south, in direction to south. So that's to give you an idea of municipality to which I belong officially. The other one, which is Bancroft, is the closest to me geographically, and Hastings County is above me because it.
That's really helpful. So there's 17 municipalities.
I would not. Well, I think you take me a little bit short. I didn't do research, but I think they are 17 in Hastings County.
So it doesn't change municipalities in Hastings County. We're not going to focus on all of those locations because that's a lot of places.
Oh yeah.
But we're going to focus on Hastings Highlands municipality, your
yes.
municipality,
yes.
Bancroft, because it's attached, and there's
that's right.
There's some developments there, and then the larger county of Hastings.
Yes, which is above them.
Why don't we start with your own municipality? That's where for you the action really started.
That's
right?
true. Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I am a member of both Canadian Secular Alliance and Secular Ontario, and Secular Ontario, tries to make municipalities respect the ruling of Penetanguishene of 1999. So, being part of Secular Ontario, I was wondering how I can help my association. And what I've done, my situation was a little bit delicate because for about half a dozen of years, I was attending my municipal council in Maynooth, Council of Hastings Highlands, on a regular basis. But it was for a very, very concrete reason. I was volunteering for my local association, and I was representing that association there. And now I had a problem because being a non-believer during those council meetings, I was subjected to the Lord's Prayer. So anyway, I decided in 2008, I decided that I would ask something. Actually, at the same time, a fellow secularist who is now dead, the late Bill Broderick, we were talking together, and he decided to start the same thing, asking the municipality to change this procedure. He would do it in Belleville. So
when you say you and Bill were both asking or having these conversations, what kind of process would that be? Is that you call up your local counselor and you set up a meeting and you try to get them to introduce a motion?
Yeah.
How would that work?
No, in my case, because I was attending regularly, so I was a person whom they knew from twice a month, so I would be at the council. So what I've done, I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to my council, and I asked in that letter, I wanted to start in a conciliatory way. So what I asked at that time in 2008, I explained why I felt excluded from this procedure of opening with Lord's Prayer, and I asked them to be included. And I explained that as an atheist, I would like to be allowed to say atheist invocation once or twice a year. So that letter came to my municipality, and the councillors took knowledge of that. But unfortunately, my request was not granted. So they continued with the prayer. And Bill Broderick, at the level of the county in Belleville, I think that he went in person. He was not a regular attendee of the council, but he went to the council in person and he asked to discontinue the Lord's Prayer, and he explained why and so on.
Why do you think it was important for you and Bill to take this more conciliatory or diplomatic approach, at least to begin?
I think that's the first thing you have to do. People should know why you ask, why it is important to you, why you feel excluded. You see, if you don't explain, I think you miss something. And it's very important that we talk. I am for conversation, I am for debate, and the debate has to continue. And actually, after my municipality in 2008, when my municipality decided to continue, I continued to talk about it. And
even after they had more or less attempted to close the door on your more diplomatic approach?
I talk to people on a personal basis. I will not reveal what was said, because, you know, when I ask if I could have conversation, private conversation, I thought that would enlighten both sides, and it definitely enlightened me, because I also wanted to know what was on their side, why they continue with the prayer. And actually I learned something. I learned that, you know, I think I learned three things. First of all, there's a misconception about secularism and atheism. You know, when you say, okay, I'm a secularist and I am for secular approach, people automatically react, oh, it's atheism, that's something, you know.
You're disguising your atheism.
You are disguising your atheism and something. So that's very important that people understand what it is. So I continue. Other thing I also discovered that in some cases people, councillors think that they need something to cut the street and the council. So between street, when you come from the outside, from the street, and before you start, you need something, you know. So I think it's important to know
the importance of
the
meeting.
Isn't it important? I think it is. You see, and the last thing, of course, I heard, well, it's the tradition. It's always been like that. We continue with the tradition. So yeah, I discovered something through those conversations, and I will not, you know, reveal more. But I think that it was important to have those conversations. And to answer your question, you have to speak. You have to speak. You have to debate. You have to be always open to discussion.
And you didn't just suggest that they end this tradition of marking the importance of the opening to the meeting. You actually proposed that on occasion they should rotate with an atheist invocation. I wanted you to maybe explain what kind of elements would be included in such an atheist message or invocation.
Well, it's very easy. I actually suggested, and I gave them the invocation which was presented by Herb Silverman in the United States. And at that time, it was the one which was the most famous. So I just suggested, what's in that invocation is to simply we are basing everything on our human abilities. We are not asking any supernatural intervention. We are confident as humans that we can deal with problems we encounter, and we want to concentrate on our human problems and do it in the best way possible.
So no mention, obviously, of a divinity. It's a human-centered
No, because
message.
if you are humanist, if you are non-believers in some supernatural thing, there's no reason. And I think that this kind of invocation include everybody. We are all humans. We are all humans, you see. So that's. But anyway, that was my way of approaching and how it went. So as I say, on one side it was Bill Broderick in Belleville, on my side it was my way, suggesting that maybe we could have something which would accommodate everybody without suppressing simply the Lord's Prayer. It could be some accommodation. You see.
So you weren't at first suggesting even removing the Lord's Prayer. You were just asking for some acknowledgement
of my presence. Yeah. You see, this is a rural area and so on. So we have to understand that it's not a urban environment, and I respect that. But it's interesting to see, and it's not only in my case. And you probably heard about places where the prayers are recited on a rotated. You see?
I believe the province actually uses that approach.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It has been observed that in some places like that, people would walk out of the council during the recitation of prayer, of various prayers. And in other instances, people would voice a very strong dislike of this practice. So you can't really make everybody happy. It's very, very, very difficult. So how to go about those things? So yes, my first approach in my given situation and my environment is to have some accommodation.
I think it's important when you mentioned the rural environment in which all of these municipalities exist.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about where we are in Ontario?
Oh, where we are in Ontario, where you are south of Algonquin Park, right?
Just south of the park?
Well, south of the park, we are north of Peterborough and Belleville. We are probably mid of the road, closer to Algonquin Park than to Belleville in this
What's
place.
the population of these municipalities, roughly?
Well, in Bancroft, we have about 2,800, I think. And now Maynooth, but Maynooth, the Hastings Highlands municipality, it's different because we have a lot of population during summertime. It's a cottage country, you see, so it's very difficult to, maybe 4,000, but it's very difficult to give an exact number because most of the people here are on the lakes and they are not here in a...
With the permanent population, it would be no more than several thousand?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Much less than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about some small, sparsely
Small,
populated
but
regions of the province.
Why I can give you the figure with much more precision about Bancroft, because it's written when you enter Bancroft, it's written there that we have 2,500, 800 population here. But as I say, Hastings Highlands is much more important in summertime. It's much important also bringing money in because, you know, we are waterfront, so it's a big disparity here. So that's a rural, it's a rural area.
Are these religious parts of the province?
Oh yes, yes. It's sometimes people refer to this part as Bible Belt. So I don't like those terms, but it's religious. It's religious, and there are dozens of churches around Bancroft. Just to give you an idea, you know, yeah, it is religious.
Are there other things that have happened in and around Hastings Highlands that would lead you to describe the area as religious? Notable public figures or church meetings or conferences of note that have happened here?
Well, there's a regular, you know, people go regularly to church, and to give you an idea, on Sundays sometimes you can have places which are completely desertic because people are in church, you know. So a little bit further north, there's Combermere, and that's another place which is even more religious than my area here. But to sum up, it is basically a religious culture here. Yeah.
Dagmar, tell me a little bit more about the kinds of associations and volunteering that you do within your community. You're quite active, and you have been active for a number of years.
Oh, yeah.
And you were telling us that that's what led you to the regular attendance at the council meetings.
Yeah.
What kind of work do you do?
Well, I am still, you know, member of Baptist Lake Association, which is a local association on our lake here. And for years and years I was doing the membership and representing my association at the council and so on. So it was a big deal, big part of my time. And since I've been here in this area, must be now 18 years, I've been always volunteering also at the Art Gallery of Bancroft, and I am a volunteer coordinator. So my role there is to find new people who would keep the gallery open and do our sales and train new volunteers. You know, so that's my thing locally. Then of course I'm with other associations which are not local, but locally I am those two.
given all your connections and the relatively low population, you must be fairly well known within these communities.
Well, I am certainly known because they are articles I write to the newspapers, to our local newspapers, and I'm not a very public person. I am, as you see, I live in the middle of the bush, I like to say. I'm not a public person, but sometimes you have to go out and you have to speak out, and yes, people know me from articles I write basically about what I'm doing, about the gallery, about secularism, about those things here. And yeah, last year we had a conference in Bancroft, which was, I think, successful, and it was, let's talk about secularism. So it was a little bit of challenge because in this particular environment, but it went well. It went well, and we had 40, 45 people, I think, who came. And it was
conference
successful.
on secularism
On
in
secularism.
this rural area.
Yeah.
What kind of feedback or reception do you get from your fellow constituents here?
Well, you have, I think, two reactions. First of all, religious people, they don't feel comfortable to come, that's for sure. And I think that's always that fear, secularism, it's against religion and so on. So we didn't have much people from religious community. We were 3 speakers, and we were hoping. On the other hand, people who came and who are interested, well, they say this is wonderful. It's the first thing something like this was organized in Bancroft. When is the next conference? So we have those two reactions, which are not surprising, And hopefully we will have more. I'm thinking about something like that. It takes a lot of time, but.
And to your prayer fight in particular, did you get a lot of your neighbors coming to have a little talk with you when they found out what you were up to?
Well, it went not directly. My neighbors here, most of them are religious, but they didn't. Interestingly, there's kind of a timid approach. Actually, one person who is religious told me, "Well, I agree with you. Lord's Prayer should not be, at the municipal council, but it's kind of timid." Most of the reactions came through the newspaper because, of course, people knew that I was involved, and they were, again, it came from both sides, fiery attacks and support. And support, So we had
relatively evenly divided, you'd say.
I would say, yeah, because people who who decide to write to the newspapers, I think usually they think what they do. I have also to say that, for instance, when we had our conference about secularism last year, we were so fortunate to have a wonderful coverage from our media. We have 2 local newspapers. And we have a wonderful coverage. Actually, it was before the conference that there was an article. I was interviewed by the editor, so it was announced that the conference was coming, and we have good coverage afterwards, which gave me opportunity to write a little bit more, So in a nice, gentle way.
Let's dive back into the details of the story. You were telling us that you had presented before Hastings Highland Municipality's council meeting, and the response was not so favorable.
Yeah, so this happened in 2008, and
redo that question.
Yeah,
going to have to restart this.
That's fine.
So how are you doing, you guys?
Oh, it looks excellent. You look beautiful, nice light, and yeah.
You think
great.
so?
Yeah, no, this is really good. This is great stuff. Sorry, we haven't actually been doing many of the questions. We'll try to get back to that.
Okay, you do well. If I can do.
Shoot, I just realized we see you in the shot there, in the wide shot.
Oh no, really?
Hold it as you were before.
Can you imagine dog here, 2 dogs
Yeah,
here?
we're right. We see you right above his head.
Yeah.
There.
Actually, yesterday when we were interviewing Sheila, her dog was all over the place.
Yeah,
She was on the couch. She was on
I
the
know,
ground.
yeah.
How's that?
My dog is okay for that, but the other one,
Yeah,
she's
that-
so
that's much
vocal, she
better.
would be barking all the time. So she stays with me this time 10 years, 10 days. But each time I have people, I have to take
Yeah.
her to her home because she's impossible. She's a wonderful dog, very gentle, but doesn't work when you have people
Yeah,
around.
I have one too, and she's very whimpery. So where did we leave off on the story? You did mention about the presentation you gave, right? And that you got sort of a
Well, my first step was the letter. My first step to the Hastings Highlands was the letter in 2008, all right? And then in other municipalities, the fight against the Lord's Prayer was continuing. And in 2011, I decided that I would take another step at that time.
Okay.
And in January of that year, in 2011, I went in front of my council. I asked to be.
That's when you gave the presentation. And they did
That's
a
right.
vote. You know what? Why don't? Because I don't think on camera you said too much of that yet. We kind of got off on
Okay.
some very fruitful
All
actually side conversations there. But why don't we just go back and can you just start that again and just explain?
Yeah.
You know, my first step was to send a letter.
Okay.
And
So
then tell the rest of that story.
yeah, well, my first approach in 2008, I decided to write a letter to my municipality and
Are we good, guys?
Yep,
Okay,
ready.
so we'll start from
there.
the letter. Okay,
Okay.
so just quickly, Dagmar, let's go back to the details. Let's plunge back into the story that you were telling.
Okay.
Take us step by step what you did when you first became aware that there was an issue and what your response was to it.
Well, in 2008, I wrote a letter to my municipality, and in that letter, I explained why I was feeling excluded by opening the council with the Lord's Prayer. At that time, I was going to the council on a regular basis, twice a month. So I was hoping that if I would address my councillors and ask, and what I was asking was this, I was asking if they would include me, letting me say the atheist invocation once or twice a year. I thought that that would be a gentler approach, conciliatory approach, and that I would feel part of really what was doing. I would feel part of the council of that team. Unfortunately, at that time, my request was not accepted. It was not granted. So this happened in 2008, and at the same time, at the county level in Belleville, my fellow secularist, late Bill Broderick, was taking similar step at the council in Belleville, council of the Hastings County, and I think he went in person and he asked to discontinue the Lord's Prayer. So this happened in 2008, and of course both continued with the prayer. During the time went by, and other municipalities continued with the prayer. So in 2011, I was, in front of a situation. I thought that I should have to do something more. So at that time, in January of 2011, I asked my council to be allowed to speak to them. I was granted that, and before that, I wrote an essay on secularism, because I thought it was important for them to know what secularism is, what my secular approach is. And that essay, I asked that they distribute it to everybody. So when I came to the presentation, to the council, and I was allowed to speak, I said that Lord's Prayer is against the Charter of Rights, and then in the name of Secular Ontario, I asked the municipal council to discontinue this prayer. And I explained in my presentation again, why I'm asking and so on. Unfortunately, after I finished my presentation, the motion was put forward, and the motion was accepted to continue with the prayer, and they were.
You finished with your presentation about removing Lord's Prayer, and they immediately
put a
respond
motion
by putting a motion forward to reaffirm the continuation of the prayer.
It was accepted with 2 abstentions.
How many votes are there on council?
About 9.
9.
About
so
9,
7
I think.
yay and 2 abstentions.
Yeah. I can't tell you right, but more or less to give you an idea. Yeah. So there were 2 abstentions, but so this was my official step. But you know, I am for discussion. I am for a debate. So independently of this official move, I met people, I met councillors in person, and I continue to explain, I continue to talk about it. But because my intervention was official, Secular Ontario started procedures, legal procedures, to take the municipality to court. But nevertheless, during the months which followed, I continued to talk to the councillors, and also to councillors, to members of the council in Bancroft, because Bancroft is a neighboring municipality.
Right.
I don't have, administratively, I don't have any right to intervene there, but I know those people from public events, and when I could talk on a private basis, I also, you know, talk to them and try to explain why I am doing it, why it is so important, and so on. So this was going through the year of 2011, and at that time my fellow secularist Bill Broderick was seriously ill. So in September,
Bill, who had been fighting this fight at the county level.
He was fighting it at the county level. So I decided I will take over, and I went to Belleville in September of that year. And again, I had to send my presentation in writing before, but I was accepted to come before that council and to speak, which I did. So this happened in September of that 2011. And it is interesting because, you know, there are reporters from the media at those councils, and the same day there was already a little blurb in the electronic version of one of those newspapers saying, oh, maybe Lord's Prayer may be off the council. And it was confirmed by 2 other articles which followed after that. So Belleville obviously decided to be silent. Silence is Gold was the title of one of those articles, if I remember. And interestingly, about a month after that, in Bancroft, our local newspapers were reporting about the discussions which took place at the council there. And at one point, the same thing came from Bancroft, that councillors voted for moment of silence.
So now both the municipality of Bancroft and the county are swapping Lord's Prayer for a moment of silence.
For a moment of silence. And then I think it happened in November. Our lawyer from Secular Ontario, Dan Mayo, received notification, was notified that Hastings Highlands is changing bylaw and would go for a moment of silence. So we never.
Victory for you.
We never went to the court, which I think was a good thing.
Yes.
I think.
So it was kind of a combination. I mean, they were threatened with legal action.
Oh yes.
But you had also done a lot of the groundwork to.
Yeah.
You know, make people understand why this was.
Now, you know, it's difficult to say. I don't know whether my interventions, how much they weighed in all these things, but something somewhere, somebody probably was helping, and because it went peaceful way.
Well, I'd like you to comment on this because, of course, there have been cities where not just the threat of legal action, but actual legal action hasn't immediately resulted in the city taking on making this transition.
Yeah.
In many cases, they fight it and even appeal it beyond the first court decision. In your case, though, it does appear that the legal action had a fairly quick effect. So do you think that your work was decisive in terms of making your municipality more likely to take the legal threat seriously?
I think
to put
so.
a face to it, right?
Yeah. I think I think that both, legal action probably was important. Of course. There's no. I don't know how it would be in those other, in Bancroft or in. At the county level, I don't know, because of course I am not in the secret there. But it's interesting that when you read the articles which are covering those councils, there are discussions among the councils about it. So not all the councillors are against or for, or you see, they debate it too. So that's why I think it's also important, if we want to reach something, we have to continue with talking, and they talk about among themselves too.
You almost see this fight, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as more perhaps of an educational campaign,
I think
as much as it is a political one.
Exactly. Yeah. If you see the reaction of some people in front of secularism, it's already there. How can we accept that? You can't punish people for something they don't understand. So I think the education, if you call it education or explanation, or it's as important as legal threats or something like that. I hate it, and I was hoping that that we would not go to the court, and we finally didn't go to the court. So that was good. So I think in this particular case, both were important, but I insist on education, and I think that has to be done. And I think that humans can get together in a peaceful, reasonable process. You will not find everybody open to discussion. Of course, you have fundamentalists on both sides. On both sides, you have them, with atheists, and you have them on other side too. But I think that you have always to look for some understanding.
I'm wondering then if you can compare and contrast the approach you took and the outcome with a very different approach that was taken by a fellow named Ashu Solo in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where his city also recited the Lord's Prayer, and immediately, I think he made a few calls to attempt to have conversations with City Council, but he quickly got nowhere with that, and then went very quickly to the Human Rights Commission and threatened the legal route to get the solution that he favored. And in Saskatoon, the city, I would say overwhelmingly, citizens reacted quite negatively to the approach he took. Do you think that it was more the approach that he took that was different from yours that caused that different outcome, or are there other factors, it being Saskatoon perhaps, or just the culture of the city? I
think it's hard to say. You see, everything every approach is different, and every situation is different, is unique. And there are circumstances, there is timing, there are personalities, if you have, I don't know exactly that person you are talking about in Saskatoon. It depends also if you are on choice of your words, on everything, you see. So I think every situation has to be dealt with what comes for, and each situation is different.
So Dagmar, back here in Hastings County, is it case closed for this issue?
Well, not for the whole Prince Edward and Hastings County, but for the county as itself, which has a headquarters in Belleville, and for two municipalities of it, which is Bancroft and Hastings Highlands, seem to be closed. unless we have some, you know, revolutionary movement. But in Hastings County, my municipality, the lawyer who was dealing, the secular Ontario lawyer, Dan Meyer, who was dealing, he received a written notification which is confirming this. So from the legal point of view, the case is closed.
Dagmar, let's back up. Let's
Right.
establish the big picture here. We're talking about cities knowingly violating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In 1999, there was an Ontario Appeals Court decision based on the city of Penetang-Washeen, and
That's right,
the Appeals
yeah.
Court found that it was, in fact, against the Charter to continue with the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
Cities in Ontario were sent letters, so they know this. Why do you think in many cases they opted not to make what seems like a fairly trivial modification to their procedures to remove the prayer?
Well, I think the letter came from Secular Ontario. I think my guess is that Secular Ontario, you know, was not well known at that time. It was formed in 2006, so the letter probably hit the municipalities after the 2006 or during 2006. So one thing is that Secular Ontario was not known, and the other thing probably is that they thought that it is something not important and something light, and it would just go away. And unfortunately, it didn't go away for them, you see. So thinking that it is something temporarily and it will disappear by itself, that's my only explanation why certain municipalities, actually those which continued with the prayer, why they didn't respond at all, or some of them, I think half of them only acknowledged the letter. In many cases, I think the letter was simply filed. That was the end of it, you know.
Why to you is the issue of the Lord's Prayer so important?
For me? Well, I think it is not inclusive, it is offending. If you ask me why I think it is offending, well, we have to see, we talk a lot about sensitivities, you know, sensitivities for religious people, and how religious sensitivity has to be respected. What about the sensitivity of people who are not believers? So we have to think about that too. And now, what is the prayer? Isn't it a religious ritual which is performed by people who believe in some supernatural power or being, presumably in the sky, and they pray that being or power helps them to direct activities here, human activities in this world. Now, what about people who don't believe in that power? You know, they are not covered by that. They are excluded. You know. Now, it is true that historically the prayer, Lord's Prayer, or Christian prayer, was part of public events, but it is more and more questioned, and we have to ask why. Well, why? Let's see at the composition of the society, and if we look at the Canadian census, what does it show us? In 1971, there was less than 1% of non-believers in Canada. 10 years later, we have 7%. And in 1991, we have 12% of non-believers in Canada. Then the census of 2001 comes with 16.1% of non-believers in Canada. So what does it mean? Less and less of the growing section of society doesn't subscribe to the supremacy of religion. And this growing section of society is ignored, is excluded. And there's another aspect to it. I have to say is this: there's a prevailing conception that religiosity and morality are linked. They have to be going together. So if you are moral, you have to be religious. In other words, an atheist or a non-believer is an amoral person. Well, isn't it offensive? You see, it's regrettable that people who propagate such ideas don't do some research, because there's nothing which is supporting these ideas. And interestingly, there was a report in 2004 by United Nations. It was, they came with a report about human development. And they looked at 177 countries, and they ranked those countries on a scale, and they were looking at the criteria such as health and per capita income and adult literacy and such important things. And interestingly, 25 countries with a very, very high proportion of atheists ranked very well. And among the five leading countries, and Sweden was the first, and I have to say that Sweden, according to some polls, has 85% of non-believers. Anyway, five leading countries were Sweden, Norway, Australia, Netherlands, and Canada. So what does it mean? People who continue, who insist on saying that one has to be religious to be moral, and that the societies which a society which turns its back on God is a society on a slippery slope, and will go slide to vice and crime and so on. People who say that, they don't have any facts to support it. So far, you know, for why I think it's so important that we fight this. And for me, Lord's Prayer, it's only a top of the iceberg.
Let's get to what's below that larger. Say that again.
what's
below the top of the iceberg?
Well, it's the supremacy, religious supremacy on our lives. And again, historically, it is true that religion was guiding our lives from the beginning to the end. But again, it's more and more a question now.
Well, you were talking about these important social and human development issues like literacy, and I want to sort of contrast the importance of those issues against the prayer, because a lot of people might say, well, you might be technically right that what they are doing is illegal, and perhaps it is discluding atheists, but there are all these other bigger problems that you were pointing out.
Exactly.
Why do you find that the prayer issue is not necessarily that you're right about it, but why do you think it's important enough to be worthy of the kind of effort and focus and time that you've put into it?
Because it's part of the big picture. It's the part of the whole power the religion has over, or used to have over us. You know, to give you one personal example, for instance, I have a friend who is atheist and who was not able to reveal this to his parents. All his life he had to, it's sad to say, he had to wait till his parents die to finally come publicly as an atheist, and this person is today a president of one of those free-thinking associations and so on. It gives you an idea how much the religion was muzzled people. Isn't it against our conscience? Because, you know, we are put into the situations when we are in contradiction, we are caught with our conscience. And another personal example, my first encounter with the religious rituals in a public life, for instance, goes back to 25 years when I was in Toronto at that time. And at that time, whoever was hired for the government of Ontario had to make oaths on the Bible. So when I was, you know, in that situation, and I had suddenly a person handing me the Bible, my reaction was, oh no! I was surprised. It was not, I didn't want to be impolite, but I was so surprised, I didn't expect that. But interestingly, the same surprise was on the face of that woman who was holding the Bible in front of me. And she said, well, what is your reaction? Why do you react like that? So I explained her why, and I said, you see, for me it would be hypocrisy if I would swear on something which for me has no meaning. We discussed a little bit, and that person finally said, well, swear on your honor, which I did. But today I realize how lucky I was that I was able to reach somebody through the reasoning. Imagine that I would have somebody else who would say, okay, either you swear on the Bible or you don't have the job. What would you do? What would you have done? What, you know, I know.
It's a tough choice for anyone. Yeah.
You know, this is a concrete situation when it's not only Lord's Prayer, it's the whole picture.
Would you go so far as to say, as some do, that having to swear on the Bible or the Lord's Prayer in government proceedings makes you feel like a second-class citizen?
I don't know whether it is a good term, second-class citizen. It's against my conscience. It's like my reaction. Okay, it's my spontaneous reaction. It is something, you know, when that Bible was showed to me, it was so spontaneous. It's something, it has nothing to do with my personality. And I think that this is very important to us to be honest, to be open, and to have the right to have the freedom of conscience. And this is the concrete example of the, you know, we are asking for the freedom of religion, but freedom from religion and freedom of conscience. And this is the very concrete example. Now, going back to what happened to me with this hiring there, it happened in 80s in Toronto. Now, some 20 years afterwards, I was again in the similar situation. I was a witness at the OMB hearing, and I had to, at that time, everybody has to swear, but there was a difference. At that time, I was asked, do you want to swear on the Bible, or do you want to say, simply swear? The question came quite naturally, and quite naturally, I said, I swear. Now, we have to ask what happened during those 20 years. I think that more and more people reacted like me, by surprise or whatever it was. And finally, it became now very quietly and very naturally. We came to something that people don't tell you how to swear on the Bible. You see?
You're talking about how our society becomes more and more inclusive, so it actually also includes atheists or humanists. If you had gotten what you wanted originally, you had proposed, you know, keeping the Lord's Prayer, but adding an alternative, in this case an atheist or a humanist prayer or invocation, that might be the more appropriate term for that. Would that have been enough, do you think, to be more inclusive?
Let's put it way, nothing is ever perfect, you see. I think if I would have been included, it would certainly be something very positive, and I would probably appreciate that. It would be a progress. It would be a progress because it would not be that categorical, you are religious or you are not a human being or not a good being, you know. But thinking about this concrete case, actually it's not a best solution to have rotating prayers. I think it's not, because there are so many religions. You can't satisfy them all. What is the practical, what is the pragmatic solution? We have to look for pragmatic solution, and I still think that the best way is the silence. However, if in some places people come to some accommodation, which I think we can say is reasonable, if you have, you know, if it is educational, if it is friendly, I would think it's not the best solution, but it's something which I would not object to.
Some municipalities have not had the Lord's Prayer. They've used a more generic, non-denominational, but still God-invoking prayer or message of some kind.
Well, here you go.
And some have moved from the Lord's Prayer to the generic prayer.
Yeah.
That's more inclusive, but is that enough?
Well, what is the generic prayer? Again, if we talk to some supernatural thing, it's still a prayer, you see. So what is the generic prayer? Again, if we take everything which is divine in it, we come to some human, no divine, no religious, and that would include everybody. However, I heard also about places where silence is being introduced to start, and even this is criticized, because I read an essay contending that imposing on introducing silence is privileging non-believers. So you see, it's very difficult to make everybody happy, and we come to what is called accommodations. What is accommodations? What are reasonable accommodations?
Big debate.
Big debate, and you probably heard about Quebec and the report by Bouchard-Taylor. Yep. It came out in 2008, I think, and two things. First of all, it came with, suggesting reasonable accommodations. But what is it, a reasonable accommodation? You see, and the other thing they came up with was the with open secularism. Again, what is open secularism? We have pragmatic secularism, assertive secularism, passive secularism.
And now open secularism.
You have open secularism, but you have a closed secularism. Come on. You see, accommodations. Okay, that's a concrete thing. Let's put it that way. Canada is a multicultural country. We have people from all kinds of places, and we have people who are political refugees, people who fled here because they were persecuted or in prison. Imagine just this situation. You want to accommodate somebody who is a civil servant, and that person wants to be in a burqa, okay? To accommodate from the religious thing, that person would be delivering passports or whatever. Working as a civil servant, that's a religious accommodation. Now, come a person who is also a woman who fled Afghanistan, where they threw the acid in her face because she was not veiled. She wanted simply education, and now she comes in Canada, free country, and she's served by somebody in burqa. You see, this is the concrete situation. So, whom are we accommodating? What is the reasonable accommodation? I think that if we talk about civil servants and public spaces, government and so on, we have to see what is reasonable here. It should be free of those symbols. And here you have concrete situation who have two people. That person who comes and who was persecuted because she was not veiled, and she comes to Canada and she will say, what about her sensitivity?
You're arguing that the public prayer case has these natural tie-ins to larger debates about the role of religion in the public square, religious accommodation. So I guess in our last couple of minutes, I'm curious about what projects you have on the go. Will you be, now that you've had victory locally, will you be taking on more prayer cases or more of these related debates?
Yeah, well, I can't take more cases because I can only do where I live. Yeah, but that's not the problem because I mentioned that last year we have the gathering in Bancroft in this rural area. Gathering, we call the gathering, I did it with three other people. We had gathering for curious minds, and it was about secularism. So I plan, hopefully I will have other co-helpers with me. I play something similar. Hopefully it will work. It will take some time. But that's what I want to do, to talk, to write articles, and it never stops. And it's fascinating because, you learn yourself once you start digging in those things. And it's interesting. And it's also interesting when you have some satisfaction. As I say, last year a person came to me after our conference about secularism, and that person said, well, I think that I understand that secularism is a place when we all can meet, coming from different areas, but it's the place where we can meet. And I think it was something so warm. It was such a satisfaction for me to hear that. And I think that keeps me going on and pushes me to do more things like that. And maybe we will have something about freedom of conscience, something like that. And there's this Mustico here coming.
Dagmar, you've been tracking closely related prayer cases in Quebec. And can you compare and contrast what's been happening in a number of municipalities, I think in also smaller rural parts of Quebec, with what you've experienced here in Ontario?
Well, I am also a member of Mouvement like Quebecois, which is the secular association in Quebec. So yes, I followed Laval. It was Danielle Payette who was plaintiff in her case against her municipality. What she asked exactly was the same thing, to discontinue the Lord's Prayer at the opening of the council. And what was interesting at that time, that you know, among the people who were witness at the experts at that case, the case was brought before the Human Rights Commission, and the expert who was for the Mouvement laique quebecois was Daniel Baril. And Daniel Baril, he is an anthropologist in Quebec, and he explained the role of prayer from the anthropological point of view. And my understanding is that it had a weight. It was heeded. It was understood, and the ruling in Laval went in the favor of the plaintiff of Payette, of Danielle Payette, and the prayer was discontinued. What happened recently in 2011 in Saguenay? Again, there was a plaintiff, Simoneau, and he asked the same thing, to discontinue the Lord's Prayer. Again, it went before the Human Rights Tribunal, and the Human Rights Tribunal ruled the same thing: discontinue the prayer and also to take the religious symbols from the council room. And in this case, in Saguenay, the mayor Jean Tremblay disagreed, and he went on appeal. And the Quebec Court of Appeal came recently, this last May, they came recently to a decision which is very confusing, because in a way they say that he can continue with the prayer, but it should not be a prayer. But then he is doing some prayer, and he obviously, you know, we don't know whether it is religious prayer. He still is using sign of cross before he starts his whatever it is. Anyway, the ruling is confusing for everybody, and what I also understand, that again the expert from the anthropological point of view, Daniel Baril, was again present to this case. But in this case, the ruling doesn't seem to give much importance to this anthropological side of the issue, and much more is on two experts which are defending theological side.
Theological.
Theological, yes, yes. So it's. But
now that's a theological defense of what? Of the appropriateness of a prayer in a government proceeding?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what kind of argument they made?
I would, you know, it's so confusing for not only for myself, but there were articles in Quebec newspapers, and it's impossible to follow, because you have one argument and you have other argument which is contradicting in the same ruling. So it is very difficult to find out. I would sum up from my point of view and what I could follow and how I understand it, that in Saguenay, the stress, the importance was based on anthropological, non-religious.
In Laval, you mean?
In Laval, which didn't happen in Saguenay, in Saguenay case. But I would not go to more, because honestly, it seems to be confusing for everybody. And I read articles in the newspapers, you know, in Quebec, and it's confusing for everybody.
Well, let's explore this confusion, because the appeal court in Quebec that just ruled in May of 2013 found that neutrality, and I want to read to you what they say about neutrality, and then I'll come back with a question. Neutrality does not require that society be cleansed of all denominational reality, including that which falls within its cultural history. There was no evidence that the prayer recited before the official opening of council meetings was imposing religious views on citizens or shaping government actions. But in that very quote, they describe it as being an aspect of culture. So that sort of connects it to the anthropological argument that might have been made, that it is something that kind of binds some members of society, but that might also leave out others.
Let's talk about historical, about heritage and so on. For instance, there's a lot of talk about removing the religious symbols in the Quebec legislature.
Yes.
Right? And people who say, well, no, this is our historical, this is our heritage, and so on. When was it put there? It's not historical, it's recent. It was put there by Duplessis in 1936. What is so historical about it? You see, we have to see what is really the cultural heritage. Of course, in Western world, we are part, and we are our heritage is Christian heritage. That's of course we will not. We have cathedrals, we have churches, and we will not raise them. They are architectural treasures and so on. We are not raising everything like Talibans, right? But I think we have to be also rational and reasonable when we think that the cross in legislation in Quebec is a historical.
And only a historical.
Yeah, that's right. You know, so it's not straight, but you can always find arguments on both sides, as it is a question. You see.
Despite ruling for the city of Saguenay in the recent appeal court decision, the judge nevertheless did comment on the eccentric, let's say, behavior of the mayor, Jean Tremblay, and suggested that some of his own personal actions might cross the line.
Yeah.
Why do you think the judge simultaneously ruled in favor of this, let's just call it a prayer, but at the same time came out with these comments about the mayor?
Well, that's what's so confusing. I don't have answer. How even in the judgment of those three judges, because there were three judges, right? You can't have a consequent. You have sensible answer. You don't have. For instance, the Jean Tremblay, the mayor, he says, well, it's not really a prayer, but previously he said that yes, he believes in Jesus Christ, and then he will come on the other side. He will tell him, I fought for you, so I am so happy to see you again. You see, it's so illogical to answer your question. How can we explain judges' inconsistencies? Because that's what it is. It doesn't fit together.
The other element of the judge's decision that I noticed was that he actually references the ubiquity of Christian symbols in the public square. He points out specifically Canada's national anthem, which references God. So do you think that all of these fights are more or less interrelated? That if we're going to take on public prayers, we better be ready to take on the anthem and perhaps the preamble to the charter that also invokes the supremacy of God?
Well, we may end up there too, and about the God in the preamble of our Constitution. I think that it's unfortunate that it is there, and my understanding is that in the 80s, when the Constitution was brought by Trudeau to Canada, it was not his intention to have got in the preamble. But he was under pressure of evangelicals, and that's how we got it. The problem is that each time you try to get loose of that supremacy, religious supremacy, you are quite often sent back and asked almost to keep quiet, because we have got in our preamble of our Constitution and so on. So I can't say whether we will go there, but maybe it's the way to go.
These developments in Quebec that are to you disappointing, I suppose, that Quebec has, at least at the appeal court level, ruled in favor of the use of prayer.
Yeah.
They stand in contrast to the Ontario Appeals Court, which has ruled against Lord's Prayer. To be fair, they haven't ruled yet on non-denominational prayer. Where do you think this is going? Do you think the Supreme Court is therefore likely to hear this case if it were to be appealed to them to provide some kind of clarity and speak to this inconsistency across the provinces?
Well, I think it will go to the Supreme Court, and what the outcome will be, it's impossible to say, because, courts are formed by human beings, and composition can change and so on, so it's very difficult to say where it will go, but it seems that that's the direction where we are heading for. And when it will come, it takes some months, but I think that, yes, it will come before the Supreme Court.
Dagmar, you've really helped us to better understand the fight that you're in and why it's important to you, but also why it connects to some larger issues. Thank you so much for joining us here on Think Again TV.
And thanks for having you and accepting me. All right.
It's been a pleasure. Peter Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me here on Think Again TV.
Thanks for coming.
I want you to take us through the story that you went through fighting your prayer fight. Tell me how you first came to realize there even was a problem.
Sure. I was made aware of this problem when, just after the last municipal election, the town of Owen Sound, which is the location of the Grey County seat, I'm suing Grey County, that the city of Owen Sound, one of the councillors raised the red flag and said, we're saying prayers here in our council deliberations. Should we be doing this? And if not, how can we change things? And the local paper was smart enough to say, well, not only is it happening with the city of Owen Sound, but Grey County is using the Lord's Prayer every time it gets together as well. And the warden at the time said to the paper, well, if anybody says anything about it, then we'll do something about it. So I immediately wrote a letter saying, put me on the list because this is not right. And it's not right because it's a charter issue. It's not permitted by the charter. And I found, to my surprise and dismay, I was the only person who said anything. And so that kicked off a process of about a year and a half whereby I would go to council, make presentations, send presentations, trying to convince them that precedent showed that they were breaking the law and that it was not a good idea to be breaking the law, and could they please stop.
You found it originally by reading it in the press.
That's right.
What was it, do you know, that motivated this particular council person at the municipal level of the Aurelia, of the city of Aurelia, to take this issue seriously, or to present this issue to the county?
Well, the Owen Sound councillor, I don't know what her motivation was, other than that it seemed to her that something was wrong. Either they weren't doing it the right way or they shouldn't be doing it at all. She just wanted to start talking about it. And as it ended up there, I think they came up with that well-worn solution of, well, let's have different prayers week by week. And of course, having more prayers is worse than having only one prayer. And so that's how that stood there. So as I say, I went through this process with county council, and then I reached the point where they were not listening to reason of any sort, and I tried to marshal numerous reasons. And during that process, it struck me that the provincial government has responsibility for municipalities through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And so I turned to them, tried to reach the minister, talked to the deputy minister. And I asked them, how many municipalities are breaking the law by doing this? And what are you going to do about it? Because it's your responsibility. And they said they didn't know, they didn't want to know, they weren't going to do anything, and they wanted me to go away.
They were not tracking this issue, the Ministry of
No,
Municipalities.
no, they were deliberately, wittingly ignoring it. And so there was nothing I could do but take them to court.
So you tried a couple of different, more diplomatic approaches, I guess. Did you actually go in front of the county council meetings to present, or did you just have conversations with the councillors?
I made presentations in front of council during its meetings, and I think 2 of them were quite diplomatic, and the third, I was beginning to get a little punchy, and I was less than diplomatic, because, like it or not, they're criminals, and I don't like that.
So you made these presentations, but you couldn't find any councillors to raise a motion, which would obviously have to happen for a change to take place.
No, none of the councillors was interested.
How many councillors are there at the county level?
Well, about 18, I think.
How many of those did you speak with directly?
Well, I never did a kind of lobbying process as I was talking to them. I simply wrote them submissions and made presentations to all of them.
Okay. You did copy all of them on your
yes,
correspondence?
Everyone was completely aware.
Did you get responses from any of those 18 directly to you?
No, it was just everybody just simply ignored it.
Oh.
So
they hope the problem would go away.
I suppose so. I'm not sure they even felt that about it. I think they just didn't think it was even worth thinking about. So they proceeded.
Once you were ignored by the county and by the ministry, what was your third step after that?
Actually, there was one interim step where I tried to turn to my local MPP, who's a conservative under a Liberal government, and I said it was up to him to be taking this on. But he, being one of the good old boys from the county and having been a municipal councillor, was of the same opinion as the councillors, that it wasn't up to him and he didn't have to do anything, even though he's the guy responsible.
I think for some of our listeners who are maybe new to this whole thing about Ontario public prayers, you should explain when you describe the councillors as effectively being criminals, that they are that they're doing something illegal. What are you basing that judgment on?
Well, it's illegal under the charter to trample on citizens' right to conscience and freedom of religion. So under the charter, they're wrong. And I'm sure you've heard this from other people. In Penetanguishene some years ago, a chap took his counsel there to court, and the decision came down that the Lord's Prayer is illegal.
That's the Ontario Appeals Court that ruled on that one.
I'm sorry. Yes, right. Yeah, so.
Do you see this as a fight for church-state separation, or would you characterize it in some other way?
I would characterize it in 2 ways. I think separation of church and state is a worthy and necessary impulse. But there are 2 things that I find objectionable here. One is that my council is breaking the law, and the other is that it's trampling on people's rights. I'm a firm believer in human rights for everyone. And so to have these people overturning the rights of myself and everyone else in the county sticks in the craw.
So after you had exhausted what you perceived to be all of your diplomatic channels, you then took the legal route. Can you talk about what you did to get lawyers involved in this case and to begin a lawsuit?
Well, to get legal assistance, I cast about trying to find someone, and I can't remember the exact process that occurred, but eventually I ended up talking to Secular Ontario, and they put me in touch with a lawyer who's a member and sort of operative for them, Dan Mayo, up in Carp, Ontario, and he agreed to take the case.
Were you a member of Secular Ontario before?
No, I wasn't. No.
Were you even aware of the organization?
No, no. And I have this image of all kinds of people all around the province, everybody attacking the problem on their own without any knowledge that they could get together. And I think getting together might be something that might be worth doing, especially if the Minister of Municipal Affairs is not enforcing the law. If he's not enforcing the law, we don't have a law. We seem to have a law, but without enforcement, as everybody knows who tries to write a law, without enforcement, you don't have a law. So this guy, I think it's a guy, has to be taken to task and be made to do his job.
What's the current state of the lawsuit that you filed?
The lawsuit took a bit of an interesting turn. As soon as we sued council, they turned around and overturned the Lord's Prayer, which they had been using for 160 years. They immediately ditched it. Why? Because they could see from the law, from the Penetanguishene precedent, that they hadn't a leg to stand on. So they excised that prayer. What they did do, though, instead, and even worse, was to take on what's known commonly, I think, as the Renfrew prayer, which is a kind of so-called generic prayer developed in the House of Commons for its use and changed for use in municipal operations. This is a prayer which, unlike the Lord's Prayer, which is relatively benign and talks about motherhood issues and doesn't really say anything about any kind of activity, this one calls for an almighty God, raises its hopes to an almighty God, and explicitly calls for direct involvement in the affairs of the council. So it's a far more proactive and invidious kind of prayer than the original. So they did that, and then it seemed to myself and Dan Mayo, the lawyer, that because there is a precedent in the review of the Renfrew prayer, the second prayer, where some very poor judge made a decision in favor of that.
Of the generic prayer.
Prayer, yeah, the generic
that
prayer.
Was okay, yeah.
That we ran the risk of losing. The precedent might be sufficient that we would lose. I'm not willing to waste $25,000 or however much it may cost to fight that fight. I don't have it. So we put the suit on hold until we could get a reading from a case against the mayor of Saguenay, which deals with similar issues, in hopes that there would be a definitive result in that case in favor of secularity, if I can phrase it that way.
Now that that decision has come out of Saguenay that has okayed a more general version of the prayer, will your case will your particular case be continuing, or and what, if so, what effect will the decision in Quebec have on the likely outcome of your case?
Well, our anticipation and hope in Saguenay is that that case will be then taken to the Supreme Court, which will be a further step for us, a further period of waiting until that should happen, if it does, as we hope. So that's where things stand. At this point, we're not willing to proceed until we have greater assurance of success.
Do you feel that it's likely the Supreme Court will be hearing this, will agree to hear this case if it were appealed to them? I'm
not familiar enough with the processes at that level to be able to say. Okay. I have to say that with the poor judge in Saguenay and the poor judge at Renfrew making decisions which seem to ignore, not to say contradict, the law, that I'm not hopeful at this point of that any judicial operation will result in success for us, because there seems to be an abiding presumption that Christianity is the way things are in this country, even to the extent of the judicial toward judicial operations, and so it's seemingly very difficult to break through willful blindness.
If the Supreme Court does agree to hear the case, I guess all bets are off, what direction it would go in. But if they don't agree to hear it, and the Quebec Appeal Court, the Quebec Appeal decision, and the Quebec Appeal Court decision holds, would you continue with, as you mentioned, a rather expensive process to appeal or to continue fighting your case here in your county?
Not unless I win a lottery.
Really?
It's not something I see. I shouldn't use the term wasting my money on. I think it's good money spent, but I don't have the money to do it. Mm-hmm. That is, I don't have the money to risk doing it. It may cost nothing. We might win the case, in which case it would cost nothing. But as I say, I am not hopeful because of the way these judges don't understand what they're talking about. And of course, I would say that because they disagree with me. But I find every argument they make is so easy to argue against, but they don't see it.
Well, actually, would like to read to you from the Appeal Court of Quebec decision,
right,
and see if I can get you to respond to this, because here they're commenting on the appropriateness not just of this 20-second generic prayer as it's being described, but also the use of religious symbols like an artist's rendition of a crucifix and a 60-centimeter high statue of the Sacred Heart. And what the justices said about this is that neutrality does not require that society be cleansed of all denominational reality, including that which falls within its cultural history. There was no evidence that the prayer recited before the official opening of council meetings was imposing religious views on citizens or shaping government actions. What would you say to that?
Well, of course, there's no point in trying to cleanse society of Christian impulses. However, our government must be free and clear of any religious symbology or activity. It seems to me. If I could just look up that up and look at the second part of it.
Sure. Yes.
Yes, there was no, quote, there was no evidence that the prayer recited before the official opening of council meetings was imposing religious views on citizens or shaping government actions, he said. Well, as to government actions, who knows? But it was obviously, this is what I don't understand about these judges, it was obviously imposing religious views on citizens. That's what it was. It was a religious activity imposed on citizens. And the judge apparently, I should say, the 3-judge appeal panel, through Justice Guy Gagnon, noted that the case brings to the fore the difficult and delicate question of the state's religious neutrality. That is not a difficult and delicate question. The simple fact is that all of our states shall have religious neutrality. There's no fooling around. There's nothing to worry about. You simply, as a judge, say, sorry, no religion in government. It's that simple. And there's no reason for them to be humming and hawing about it.
If you were to respond, though, that what the judges meant by not imposing religion was that they're not forcing, citizens or even other politicians, the councillors, to participate in the prayer or to believe in the message of the prayer. That's what he means by not imposing. How would you say that?
That's a point that came up in my dickering with Grey County Council. Their attitude was, well, we're not forcing you to say the prayer. If you don't like to hear the prayer, then leave the council chamber. The response to that is, if I don't want to hear the prayer and you want to say a prayer, you leave the council chamber, because this is the seat of the government, this is sacred ground to our country, and you're not allowed to have any religion in here. I'm not leaving, you must leave. So it's out they go.
The other interesting response that the justice provided in his judgment of the case was that he referenced the ubiquity of Christian symbols, and he mentioned, for example, the reference to God in the national anthem as evidence that Canada is not going to cleanse religion or God from every vestige of its invocation in the public square.
Right.
So do you think that a fight for secularizing government proceedings vis-a-vis removing prayer is really, interconnected to other church-state fights or civil liberty fights, for example, like the national anthem?
Yes, of course I do. There should be no reference in our national anthem to God. There should be no reference to our sons without a reference to our daughters. There should be no reference to God in the Charter of Rights. All of these things have to be eliminated. And when he talks about the ubiquity of, however you had it, the ubiquity of Christian symbology throughout society, that's fine. But we all come together in our seats of government. Those are places where we put aside all of these things that we may or may not believe in, and we all deal with one another utterly neutrally and without the imposition by one group on another. Those are the clear, so you can envision Christian symbols, crosses all over this country, and others for other people too, all over this country except where the government sits. That's where that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. You may believe what you will, but you may not say anything about it in government.
But again, given that these issues are interrelated and that as we fight any one of these fights, political opponents or justices can point to other examples like the anthem or like the charter that paint a picture of a country, in their opinion, that is Christian or is founded on Christian values. I guess what I'm asking is how do we contend with that? How do we fight all of these multiple fights at once? Or how do we fight one particular fight when we are confronted with this particular counter-argument?
Well, I think it is possible to be very simple-minded about it and say that there shall be no religious activity in the seats of government, and that takes care of all of those. I understand from, as you say, there are so many references to God in so many aspects of our lives that this is why these judges don't understand what they're talking about. They don't understand the idea of secularity because they see this as being, as you said, a country founded on Christian values. Well, so what? In 1982, we got a Charter of Rights. That reestablished the country in a new vein. It set the new rules. Sure, there were lots of Christians around. I'd love to know how many Jews there were at the beginning of Confederation, because we can't all have been Christians. We can't all have founded everything on Christian principles, and I should think that Jews were the most likely secondary or smaller grouping. So it's a kind of cultural arrogance to say that we are a Christian country. We never have been. It's just that the Christians,
some elements of diversity.
The Christians have, exactly. But the Christians have always been numerous enough to be able to establish hegemony, and that's not on. We're an equal country now, as of 1982. Doesn't matter what the past says.
Your original attempt to have these conversations with the county and others who were in your situation, sent letters, made presentations, and what you were asking for seemed like something fairly simple. Remove the prayer. I mean, it doesn't cost money to do that. It doesn't really, change the way government does business on a foundational level, or so it seems. Right. Why did so many why did all, in your case, all the politicians ignore it? Why did they put up such a fight? At least in the case of a number of other cities where this was an issue. In the case of Saguenay, for example, the mayor fundraised himself to keep prayers going, to appeal the lower court decision. Right. Why do so many politicians in particular get so agitated about something that seems like a small issue?
Well, I don't know if it's politicians in particular. I think there are a lot of people in this county who hate me. In fact, I've been on enough radio programs about this to know there are a lot of people in this county who hate me. Why? Because I'm attacking their religion. And religion, in my experience, can be a hateful thing. There are some wonderful things about it, but it can be a hateful thing. Literally, hateful. And so and people cling to it. They cleave to their religion. And so when someone offends them by saying, would you please stop doing your religion in my face? Then their response is, it's my religion. I'm going to do whatever I want. And that's the opinion that I think that these counselors have, that it's what they do. It's theirs. And as a sidelight, anybody who is in conflict with that is just wrong.
Well, I know that you're clearly right on the legal side of things. That any municipality in Ontario that continues to use a Lord's Prayer in particular is violating a very clear decision by the Ontario Appeals Court. But what I'm wondering is why this is such an important issue for you. So not just that you're right, but that you're motivated to put the kind of attention and focus and some degree of funding behind this particular fight, of all things that you could pick on.
Yeah, well, baldly, it just ain't right. The thing that gets to me is that these people who are my employees, I employ these people, I pay them, and they are breaking the law. And I think that that's despicable. And I can't see how they can argue their way around breaking the law. They just ought to stop. And so when I see something wrong, and this is definitely wrong, then I try to stop it. That's the only motivation, really.
You mentioned how you feel about the particular generic prayer that's used at the House of Commons and by a number of municipalities in Ontario. But if that prayer were cleaned up of, all the attributes to God that you don't like, but still did invoke God, I mean, would that be inclusive enough, or is that logically incoherent?
I thought that was really funny that they started talking about it as a generic, non-discriminatory, non-sectarian prayer. Right. It's ridiculous. There seem to be about 44 sects in Canada. Of those 44, only 3 are served by a prayer to God. That's the Baha'i, the Christians, and the Muslims. Nobody else believes in a deity named God. So this prayer, if it maintains, as you say, reference to God, is satisfying only 3 out of 44 sects. And it's not satisfying the atheists, it's not satisfying the agnostics, and it's not satisfying people like me who just couldn't care less about the issue of religion. I'm not in this because I'm anti-Christian. I'm not in this because I care about religion. I care about the law, and I'm employing criminals.
Are there also potential allies in those other religions and sects that are, believe in a supernatural reality, but perhaps don't have the same kind of attributes that they put on a monotheistic God, say Buddhists or Hindus, for example? I mean, could they be brought under?
That may be, but why you're proposing in asking that, the proposal would be just what Owen Sound came up with, where instead of one prayer that prays to God, they get a bunch of prayers coming in from different religions. Why would we worsen the situation from a prayer that prays to God by adding more religions to that prayer? Why do we care? We don't care. We don't want any religion. We don't want more religions. We want fewer religions. We want none.
So you've answered my next question about the rotating prayer, but just to get back, what I was actually suggesting was more, a PR or a tactical approach that you might take, which is with the goal of getting rid of all prayer, working with communities who might also be offended by the so-called generic prayer, like, again, Buddhists or Hindus, who are not necessarily atheists or agnostics, for the most part anyway, but perhaps are not served by a kind of monotheistic type of prayer. Could that be
Well, you could try that, but then you'd be trying to do what I kept hoping would happen when I was fighting this with counsel before I took them to court, which is you would find an actual Christian or an actual Buddhist or an actual Jew who would say, I have this belief, but I don't believe that we should be having any beliefs in government. A real Christian would say, yes, I'm a loving Christian, but I will not bring my religion into the forum. Yeah. So those are the kinds of people that you would have to seek. And as I'm saying, I mean, just talking tactically or strategically, I think if you're asking for more trouble than you'll get benefit, personally.
I'm wondering if you would be okay with, say, a moment of silence. If all prayer were removed completely, no rotating prayer, no generic prayer, but instead there was something to mark the importance of the occasion, the sacredness, that's your own word actually. Would a moment of silence do the trick? A
moment of silence would be permissible, but I remember reading one of the websites that came to light after I was getting contact through Secular Ontario, where some guy addressed that issue and said, when's the last time you sat down in a business meeting and everybody said, okay, we're just going to have a minute of silence here while we figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to approach it. You'd be laughed out of the room, he said. And it's true, you would. Everybody knows that the moment of silence is just a ghost of a prayer, but it's still just a ghost of a prayer. So it's pointless. It's a sop to the Christians or to anybody who wants religion in the process. So I mean, it's fundamentally benign, but it's kind of silly.
Do you accept the argument though that we need something to mark the occasion?
No. You just need the gavel from the warden.
Just
let's start. Let's get to business.
And I guess just in our last couple of minutes, I'm curious if for you this is part of a larger agenda. You mentioned you're not a member of Secular Ontario. Are you a member of any other secularist or humanist or atheist organizations for whom this is part of a larger project, or is it just something that personally means something to you and that's why you got involved?
The latter. I just got involved in this because I saw my councillors breaking the law. When I see my governments breaking the law, I intend to take action. But I don't have a concerted program. There's no next on the hit list for me. It's just, if something comes up that's wrong, take care of it. And I expect that from any citizen, not in a concerted way.
I like that answer a lot. Yeah, I think we've covered all of the ground I wanted to.
Good.
To get us through, is there anything, that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to?
No.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Pleasure.